I absolutely respect what Kevin is saying in terms of a principle that I personally don't like blanket bans or any kind of banning of freedom of speech. I think the way that we persuade people, the way we are shaped, whether it's our own views or other people, is to engage. And that would be my starting point. But when we know that there are real dangers, we're not talking about people being manipulated to silence each other, then we have to take that seriously. The Maccabi fans have a very specific record of causing risk to life, risk to people's safety. And in Amsterdam, where they played recently, they've actually been banned as a whole team because there were hundreds and hundreds of them rampaging through the streets looking for Muslims in particular to attack. And it was on that basis, on a genuine safety basis, that the SAG, the Safety Advisory Group, and the West Midlands Police took the decision to say a ban would be recommended. Let's not forget that Aston Villa Stadium is right at the heart of a very dense residential neighbourhood. And given our demographics in our city as well with young people, there's a real danger, number one, that they would be, that the ordinary residents would be attacked. And number two, that people then would hit back. And that would cause another safety issue. So it would have been absolutely irresponsible. It was not a hypothetical scenario. Literally, in the weeks running up to this match, we've had the serious violence incidents. And the irony, it would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. It was actually the team's own leaders who decided that they would not accept the Villa tickets. It wasn't because they were banned by West Midlands Police, because we had all the political furor where we had Keir Starmer stepping in, we had Kerry Bennydock stepping in, we had Nigel Farage stepping in, even Ed Davey stepping in, absolutely condemning this ban. I'm going to come back to that. But it's because they kicked off in Israel, and within Israel they couldn't control their violence. And the idea that those same people then would be welcomed and facilitated on the streets of Birmingham, the risk that would entail to police officers' lives as well as to ordinary Birmingham residents, that would have been deeply, deeply irresponsible. So with every freedom, we have to balance that with safety. And I would absolutely, 99% of times, I'm the person advocating, let's have freedom, let's have engagement, let's have openness. I'm very, very uncomfortable with using any kind of banning, whether it's on a public platform for speech or whether it's physically having people engage with one another. So I think it was absolutely right. The way it's been politicised, though, has been awful. And it's been Birmingham's Muslims actually have been the most vilified. Because when it came to the state, and I mentioned Keir Starmer, within hours of West Midlands Police announcing their recommendation to ban based on intelligence, we start to have this idea that it was Birmingham Muslims who were somehow insisting that Jewish people were not welcome. An absolute vile smear. And this is where the politics does come in, because it's not a new smear. As part of Israel's campaign, as part of Israel's justification for its war crimes, which are well documented by the United Nations and lots of other respected bodies, the idea that Muslims are somehow inherently violent, aggressive, anti-Semitic is used as a justification for the demonization of Palestinians. So there is a direct political line here that was being made then to Birmingham Muslims as somehow being uniquely anti-Semitic and contributing to a climate of fear or lack of safety for our Jewish brothers and sisters. When we are a city which we live side by side, we have a genuine harmony. My own youngest brother went to our local Jewish school here. So this inflammatory rhetoric, which we then get left with, thank God that there was a violent outbreak on Thursday. But I can tell you, I feel that some people were relishing the idea of it. Some people were welcoming it. Some people wanted to see that happen in order to justify further demonization of Muslims in this country, but also the justification of violence against Palestinians that's been carried out by Israel. So this is where it's become very dangerous. And it's even more dangerous because our mainstream politicians have absolutely repeated the lies, have fanned that flame, and we get left with it. And it's not the first time that as Muslims, we're literally the political football here. We've had Trojan horse controversy here, where Muslim parents were accused of being extremists, infiltrating schools because they became governors based on a fake letter, but it took years to expose that. We've had Project Champion, we've had surveillance by police cameras pretending that it was all about traffic control, when literally in hedges in areas where there's large Muslim populations, we had listening devices, cameras being pointed into people's bedrooms, and the West Midlands Police apologised for that. So it's not the first time, but what we're seeing now is a very, very dangerous, fraught moment in our history in this country, because we've had huge far-right mobilisations. There is an absolute connection now. It's not accidental that Tommy Robinson, the EDL, the English Defence League, was actually started off as a Jewish Defence League. And the link between Zionism and the far right has now become more and more entrenched. The fact that Tommy Robinson went to Israel and was actually trying to call out people to come and descend on Birmingham, which have added another damage to the safety and risk issue, especially to Birmingham's Muslim communities, and was not condemned by the mainstream politicians. But I feel that this has been normalised now. And so we have to call this out. So that's on the safety issue. But there's also another really important principle here.
1 more minute, Salma, please.
South Africa was boycotted for its apartheid regime. It's not, and the idea that somehow Israel's being singled out uniquely, of course not. As I said, Amsterdam already has banned the Israeli football team. But in principle, we've seen that Russia is banned. Its teams, as well as its fans, are banned. FIFA, UEFA have taken those decisions. So it's actually exceptionalism to say, well, no, that same principle cannot be applied to Israel. So number one, we don't want as a city to be promoting apartheid and whitewashing, because that's part of what it's all about. Just as a Eurovision Song Contest, just as their normalisation in football, sports and culture, it's about saying this is a normal state, when actually it's a genocidal state, and we shouldn't be afraid and silence in calling that out. But secondly, it so happens that uniquely that Maccabi team also have this violent record. So on both those counts, it was absolutely right to call it out. And I'm really proud of Birmingham citizens who turned out and said, not in our name. We welcome everybody, our Jewish brothers and sisters, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, people of faith, no faith. Samosas were being given out, tea was being given out. This was a festival that we wanted to make sure that our unity was on display. But at the same time, to say, no, that doesn't mean that we look the other way when a state which is carrying out genocide is then welcomed and given the red carpet in our city. There's lots of subtleties here, but I can tell you just as a local resident, people were really scared. The narrative was that Jewish people are not safe. And whilst the numbers of Muslims are not insignificant in Birmingham, I can tell you as a mom of boys, as somebody who lives in Birmingham, we viscerally felt the threat, both to our physical safety and to our reputation. Because especially when our so-called mainstream leaders waded in and accused us of being anti-Semitic, accused us of making Jewish people feel unsafe. We knew that was going to be something we were going to have to live with long after the match, whichever way it went. But also, there was no guarantee that we would not see violent riots, and it would have been our families, first and foremost, who would have been at that risk. But that was never publicly acknowledged. In this meeting, we've talked about, how the threat has been actually from the Maccabi fans. But out there in the mainstream discourse, that was pretty much lost. And it was quite deliberate, because actually the very opposite narrative was put out by our own Prime Minister. Even West Midlands Police was attacked, and West Midlands Police themselves didn't acknowledge that their risk assessment was about the Maccabi fans being the threat. And there was no acknowledgement about the vulnerability of Muslim communities. And that says a lot about where politics is at. It says a lot about the weaponisation, sadly, of the use of the words anti-Semitism, because the promotion of this idea that we, as Muslims, are the threat to Jews, is a lie, but actually it makes Jewish people feel more fearful. It creates that situation. And at the same time, it's Muslim communities feeling vulnerable. So the politicisation has been absolutely horrendous. And in those circumstances, still come out and say, well, we're going to still make a moral stance that the genocide that's being carried out is absolutely wrong. And it does send a message when we legitimise Israeli football teams here to say, well, that's just a bit something that's happening over there. We don't need to look at that. We don't need to focus on that. So just to keep some focus on that was a deeply principled, brave and courageous thing to do, especially in the face of what we were facing. So I'm really proud of Brummies who came out and made that point. I don't think we could make so many of the other subtle points that people here have talked about. That's a long-term thing about how football in itself and how Palestinian football, need to be supporting that, and how to engage, on a longer-term, ongoing basis with football fans themselves. But what was clear to me was that Tommy Robinson, when he made that call and said to the far right and his supporters to come down. It would have been about kicking off in Birmingham, So this is what really is about. So we can't lose sight of that, and that's an ongoing political framing. That's not just finished on Thursday. In fact, those people are really disappointed that there was not a kick-off, and that tells you something about where politics is at. So we're still at the foothills of this struggle, and unity, solidarity, the commonality between us as human beings is something that we really need to focus on, and not to forget and abandon the Palestinian people who have been subjected not just to moral and political outrage, but have literally been slaughtered in the hundreds and thousands.